The term Women's March was only coined in 2017 for the marches held after the election of former President Donald Trump. However, protests, marches, and riots organized and mobilized by women in retaliation of discriminatory practices, human rights violations, and in search of equality have been occurring for over 100 years. The first mass political action led by a woman in the United States occurred in 1903. Mary Harris Jones, a schoolteacher and dressmaker, came to be an eminent union organizer and activist. She instructed children working in all factories to parade in front of City Hall in Kensington, Pennsylvania, to vocalize the harsh conditions of child labor and excesses of capital industrialism.
And I long to see the day when labor will have the destinies of the nation in your own hands.
The first instances of activism for women's voting rights began in the late 19th century, inspired by the anti-slavery movement and the whisperings of feminist advocacy. The first mass demonstrations were not until 1911, organized by suffragist leader Alice Paul. Both outspoken and courageous, she was determined to help bring about change through protests and the National Woman's Party. However, this movement and eventual success with the passing of the 19th Amendment did not include every woman's right to vote. Quote, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other women and men of color did not see their voting rights ensured until the 1964 Civil Rights and 1965 Voting Rights Acts, more than 40 years later, end quote. This example is only one of many instances of exclusion from the feminist movements, and is a tangible problem as intersectional and interconnected systems of oppression have been too easily overlooked and disregarded in feminism. A defining instigator of second-wave feminism was Betty Friedan, writer of The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963.
Not only between man and woman, the war between the sexes could become an Armageddon if we don't get on with our revolution. But if we do get on with it and we restructure society to make equality really possible, then I think the war between the sexes will end, and for the first time we will have possible true human sexual liberation, and we will have possible true love.
It is important to note that Betty Friedan did not include women of color or lesbian women in her activism, demonstrating the privilege of white women and their consistent neglect of race and sexuality during second-wave feminism. Friedan's activism in equal pay and reproductive rights is substantial, but her legitimacy is negated due to her neglect to include all women in her activism. Second-wave feminism brought upon an array of marches and mass movements in the name of equality and justice. The National Organization for Women, or commonly referred to as NOW, founded in 1966, protested segregated help wanted ads, the 1968 Miss America pageant, participated in the Women's Strike for Equality in 1970, and Take Back the Night March of 1973 to protest sexual assault and violence against women. This is a time of action in tandem with the Civil Rights Movement and opposition to the Vietnam War.
Hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend, 'cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor, and no one...
The next storm of feminist marches were invigorated by the threat of the overturning of abortion-affirming Roe v. Wade. The threat to reproductive rights became palatable, with Missouri's anti-abortion laws pending on the Supreme Court, and Bush siding with abortion foes, urging the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Over 350,000 people in the fall of 1989 gathered together for the Mobilize for Women's Lives at the Lincoln Memorial. Just 3 years later, hundreds of thousands of women marched again for women's lives as another case, Casey v. Planned Parenthood, was pending, as the fear of complete erasure of abortion protections at the federal level were at risk.
I want to hear 250,000 strong women say ho! Say ho! Ho! Say yeah! Say hell yeah!
In April 1995, more than 200,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for the Rally for Women's Lives, the largest stand against violence against women. The march was organized by NOW and endorsed by 702 national and local groups. The rally attracted many new activists, especially college students from over 200 campuses, as well as union activists, welfare mothers, and survivors of rape and incest.
I'm told this is officially the largest women's march in history. In history, nobody expected this. I'm sure Mr. Bush didn't expect this, child.
The movement continues as the March for Women's Lives in 2004 had a record high 1.5 million people in Washington, D.C. This march was led by multiple groups, including NOW, Feminist Majority, Black Women's Health Imperative, National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, NARAL, and Planned Parenthood, with ACLU joining in the final months. All these diverse people came together in solidarity and commitment to the protection of reproductive rights.
I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
Marches continue into the 2010s, most notably the Women's March on Washington in 2017, in retaliation of a known misogynist being elected into the highest office in the United States government, Donald Trump. With all these inspirational and effectual movements, why has change and progress disproportionately helped some and left others behind? Why is it the same fight year after year, continuing to appeal to a broken system? The Women's March in 2017 disregarded the multi-layered and intersectional approach necessary to be inclusive. Meredith Tallison writes in her piece, "We've Always Been Nasty," how the march has been poisoned by gender essentialism. Quote, "Cisgender women who lead other women boldly are loudly lauded. Transgender women are accused of behaving like men, and those of us who are feminine but don't consider ourselves women are commonly excluded altogether. These exclusions are particularly glaring in the light of Trump, as trans women and femmes who have a long collective and individual history of battling for our rights have been relegated to the margins of discussions about how feminists should fight in this unjust administration."
And so I want to stress the importance of us being intentional about inclusion. I think about historically trans women of color like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, who lit the fire on the LGBTQIA rights movement. And they were quickly kicked out and erased.
Sylvia Rivera, almost 50 years earlier, was excluded from activism as she was publicly denounced by a Gay Activist Alliance leader during the 1973 Gay Pride rally. The necessity for equality and solidarity is quickly forgotten when there is a call for inclusion for those beyond the scope of popular, socially accepted politics. Feminist marches have presumed a universalizing framework in which patriarchal, white supremacist, and capitalistic ideals are mobilized. Alicia Garza, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, poignantly asked, "Where were all these white people when our people were being killed in the streets? Jobless, homeless, over-incarcerated, and undereducated? Were they committed to freedom for everyone, or just themselves?" In a more reparative and less paranoid lens, it is important to recognize the beauty, invigoration, and passion that feminist marches and mass movements evoke. Even though women have been advocating for systematic change for decades without substantive success, feminist marches help bring about solidarity and unity within coalitions formed between marginalized communities and identities with varying degrees of political power. It is important to move forward with thoughtfulness and care when participating in marches, and be aware of whose voice and agenda is the loudest.